Hey guys, this is Chaos Chrono, back with another display unboxing. Welcome to the channel. Hope you guys have been enjoying the content thus far. We're on to display number 8, so let's see what we got in today's display. As I speed through the opening process, if you guys ever have any feedback on how the content is, feel free to leave that in the comment section below. As usual, I'll plug in my team podcast, Team ESP. Feel free to check us out on Spotify and YouTube. With all that being said, we're moving on to our first deck. We have Artful Conspiracy Vera. It's a Brobnar, Mars, and Sanctum deck. For Amber Generation, we're looking at 8 pips of Amber. Supporting cards include Fuzul, Mars Needs Amber, Mind Warper, and Harvester, giving me a total of about 12 for Amber Generation. For Amber Control, we have Mars Needs Amber and Mind Warper, with key cost control in the Iron Obelisk, and supporting cards including Stremeros and Barrister Joya. So overall, Amber Control is only about a 3. There is no artifact control in this deck, and where it shines is the creature control. So we have Flamewake Shaman, Champions Challenge, Exterminate, Orbital Bombardment, Sample Collection, Smite, and Vemos Lightbringer for direct removal. Then for supporting cards, we have 2 copies of Blinding Light, Radiant Truth, 2 copies of Gauntlet of Command, and 2 copies of Into the Fray, along with 2 Shockworms that have various other effects other than direct removal. So all in all, for creature control, we have about a 10. For speed, we have Sound the Horns and Evasion Portal, with support cards like Mars First and Vesma Think Drone for more efficiency, giving me a total speed of about 3. The good parts of this deck is obviously the board control, and another cool part is the Think Drone with Flame Wake and Garen Chieftain or other play effects that we can recur thanks to Vesma's ability. Unfortunately, all the other stats are very low, so overall, looking at this deck, it's a slower deck with plenty of board control, but lacking in all the other areas to be effective. So I'm going to rate this deck out of 52. Our second deck is Rodriguez, the Carefully Nimble. It's a Brobnar, Shadows, and Untamed deck. For Amber Generation, we're looking at 10 pips of Amber, with supporting cards including Take That Smarty Pants, Ronnie, Sucker Punch, Swindle, Umbra, Yancey Gang, 2 copies of Routine Job, and 2 copies of Merkins. Both the Take That Smarty Pants and Merkins are kind of iffy whether or not it'll hit, as they're situational. So overall, the Amber Generation, we're going to rate at about a 20. For Amber Control, we have, once again, Take That Smarty Pants, Ronnie, Swindle, Umbra, Yancey Gang, 2 copies of Routine Job, and the 2 Merkins as wild cards, giving me a total of about a 7. And just to highlight, we do have both Key Charge and Chota Hazri in Untamed, as well as Might Makes Right in Brobnar as key cheats. There is once again no artifact control in this deck. For creature control, we have 1-2 Punch, Bramo, Coward's End, Sucker Punch, Whistling Dart, Save the Pack, 2 copies of their Everywhere for direct removal. And for supporting cards, we have Gauntlet of Command, 2 copies of Into the Fray, Tremor, Rock Hurling Giant, Persistence Hunting, and Pinpaka Anga, giving me a total of about 10 for creature control. As for speed, we do have Perplexing Sophistry and maybe Merkins. That's about it for speed, giving me about a 1. For highlights, we have good Amber Generation and Amber Control, as well as good creature control. Highlights are Tremor with the 1-2 Punch, so we have more chances to use the punch as a removal rather than just a stun. We have our Shadows being a good Shadows. It's disruptive and it steals. It's just missing like a bigger Amber Control rather than like upwards to 3 for steal. We have utility in the 2 copies of Merkins, just the disruption and the wild card that we might be able to pull out of our opponent. So it's a great card to have. We have 2 copies of their Everywhere with a Save the Pack, so that's a nice board wipe within the Untamed house. The bad parts of this deck is the artifact control and the lack of speed. Additionally, we have a Might Makes Right with a deck that has 60 base total creature power, so we need to sacrifice a lot more creatures to actually use that as a key cheat. And also the 2 key cheats in Untamed are there when the Untamed doesn't have high burst potential. So to summarize, it's a toolkit deck that's missing artifact control and speed. There's potential plays with the wild cards, namely Merkins and a Great Shadows house. There's good combos for board control too, but none of the key cheats have potential to be used in this deck. So that's pretty unfortunate. All in all, I'm going to rate this deck at a 67. Moving on to deck number 3, we have Walker, the Rogue of Trickery. It's a Brobnar, Dis, and Untamed deck. For Amber Generation, we're looking at 8 pips to start. We have supporting cards in Fuzul, the Flex, the War Chest, Dust Imp, Misery Exploit, Darna, and Full Moon, giving me a total of about 15 or more depending on how well some of these cards hit. For Amber Control, there's actually none. So there are some support cards that deter from reaping, but otherwise they can still generate the Amber. So it's a 0 for Amber Control. And once again, it's a 0 for Artifact Control as well. For Creature Control, we do have Coward's End, Pound, Banish, and Call the Weak for direct removal. For supporting cards, we have Bloodshard Imp, Ember Imp, and Orb of Invidious, giving me a total creature control of about 4. For speed, we have Old Yerk and Punctuated Equilibrium, with supporting cards like Song of Spring, giving me a total speed about 2. And we do have a lot of disruption with Little Rapskull, Binding Irons, Tasmal, Bloodshard Imp, Orb of Invidious, and Punctuated Equilibrium. So to highlight, the disruption in board presence is good with the bodies on the board. And there's a Blood of Titans with 5+ power creatures, which can hit well for the flex. But everything else is definitely lacking. Having no Amber Control is okay, maybe, in a superior rush deck, but this is not that. It's a slow deck that is lacking a lot of tools, most importantly the Amber Control, so I'm going to rate this deck at about a 48. Deck number 4 is Kudravi, the Recordkeeper of Lightlynn. It's a Dis, Sanctum, and Untamed deck. With Amber generation, we have 9 pips of Amber to start. We have supporting cards in 2 copies of Dust Imp and the Rustnar that can potentially generate by destroying an artifact with the Amber pip on it, giving me a total of about 13 for Amber generation. For Amber Control, we have Charette, Obey the Grim, Borden the Redeemed, Maverick the Marked, and Take Hostages, with Key Control with Silver Key Imp, giving me a total of about 5 for Amber Control. For Artifact Control, we do have the Rustnar, giving us 0.5. For Creature Control, we have Unlock Gateway, Gunguzo, Onyx Knight, Harder They Come, Save the Pack, and Nature's Call. That count towards this number of about 6, but the Nature's Call is kind of iffy, as we'll discuss later. For speed, we have Yerk and Untamed Ambassador, giving me a speed about 2, but there are support cards like Exhume, Glimmer, 2 copies of Regrowth, Song of the Spring, and Nepenthe Seed, so that might bump it up a little bit in terms of efficiency. So overall highlights, there's nothing that really stands out in terms of the good parts of this deck. All the numbers are relatively below average. And as for the bad things, there are 3 alpha cards in Untamed, so that's going to potentially clog up your hand or be wasted if they all come together. We have only capture-based Amber Control, so it's only going to delay your opponent, not really stop them per se. We have Save the Pack without broad board-based damage, so nothing like They're Everywhere, nothing like Pain Reaction would be better here. We have Onyx Knight with 7 friendly creatures that have odd numbers that could be destroyed. And we have Key Charge, and once again, an Untamed that doesn't have the burst potential. It's a slow, below average deck that struggles to get good value out of its cards, so I'm going to rate it about a 50. For deck number 5, we have Hufdar, Sophomore of the Practical Bluff. It's a Dis Logos Shadows deck. For Amber generation, we have 11 pips to start, and supporting cards in 2 copies of Dust Imp, Tentacus, 3 Cutthroat Research, Eureka, Rocket Boots, Swindle, Umbra, Little Nif, and maybe Merkins, giving me a total of about 22 for expected Amber. For Amber Control, we have Tentacus possibly, 3 copies of Cutthroat Research, Swindle, Umbra, Little Nif, and for Key Cost Control, we have Anguish. So that gave me a total Amber Control about 6. For Artifact Control, we have Tentacus, Crazy Killing Machine, and the 2 copies of Snecklifter, which brings it to about a 3 for me, which is pretty high. I guess it makes up for all the previous decks that didn't have Artifact Control. For Creature Control, we have Unlock Gateway, 3 Fates, Crazy Killing Machine, Life for a Life, Whistling Darts, and supporting cards like Life Ward and Amber Imp, giving me a total Creature Control of about 5. For speed, we have York, Helperbot, Labwork, Wildworm Hole, Director of ZYX, Eureka, and supporting cards like Archimedes, giving me a total speed of about 6. There's a lot of disruptive cards here with Binding Irons, 2 copies of Tasmal, which also come with potentially a Rocket Boots, Tentacus, Merkins, Subtle Maul, and the 2 Sneckllifters. So disruption is pretty good here too. For highlights, we have the Amber generation, Artifact Control, and sufficient speed, with interesting points like Double Tasmal with Rocket Boots in the deck, Unlock Gateway with Life Ward, which makes that wipe a lot better in my opinion. Without the Life Ward, it's kind of terrible. It gives your opponent initiative, but with Life Ward, it's more neutral. We have Anguish to increase key costs for the Cutthroat Research to hit more frequently, and we have Bad Penny for Life, so there's actually a purpose for that Bad Penny. As for the bad, we're locking in Amber Control and Creature Control. So unfortunately, the cut the research is very situational, and again, it's dependent on the Tentacus surviving. We don't have any taunt creatures to protect the creatures that are important, like Anguish or the 2 Tesmals that are kind of going to be part of our endgame. To summarize, this is a potential lockout toolkit deck with a lot of disruption in combos. It's just missing a hard Amber control card like Too Much to Protect or Interdimensional Graft for this deck. But overall, I'm going to rate this deck at about a 70. Moving on to deck number 6, we have Ethlando, Cimmville, Enforcer. It's a Disc, Mars, and Shadows deck. For Amber Generation, we have 12 pips of Amber to start. We have supporting cards like Misery Exploit, 2 copies of Schuler, Mind Warper, Nerve Blast, Umbra, and 2 copies of Yangtze Gang, giving me a total of about 18 expected Amber. For Amber Control, we have 2 copies of Schuler, Mind Warper, Nerve Blast, Umbra, and the 2 copies of Yangtze Gang, along with Key Cost Control in the Lash of Broken Dreams, giving me a total of about 6 for Amber Control. Once again, there is no artifact control in this deck. For creature control, we have direct removal in Mother Gun, Life for Life, Nerve Blast, 2 copies of Sucker Punch, and Sack of Points. Supporting cards include Agent Human, 2 copies of Collector Worm, 3 Mind Worms, Zookeeper, and Bone Rot Random, which gives me a total of about 10, but there are limitations to the style of this board control because it is board based. For speed, we have Dust Chronicles and Perplexing Sophistry, and a supporting card in Exhume, giving me a total of about 3 for speed. For highlights, we have the good Amber Generation with sufficient Amber control and creature control, but there's a bit of asterisk on the creature control because of how it works. The other good parts are the archives are primarily used for containing opponent creatures with your Collector Worms and your Zookeeper, so there's no competing usage for archiving. We also have Life for Life with Bad Penny once again, giving her purpose in life. As for the bad, there is no artifact control, so that's obviously a limiting factor. And there's 2 alpha cards in Shadows, the Sucker Punch. I never like to see more than 1 copy of an alpha card in any given deck. Overall, this is a toolkit deck that's missing artifact control and a board wipe. It has potential to run the board with the Mars creature set though, so overall I'm going to rate this deck at about a 65. Moving on to deck number 7, we have the Solid Baroness, Priest of Brightmoor. It's a Brobnar, Sanctum, and Untamed deck. For Amber Generation, we have 11 pips of Amber. We have Foozle, Smith, Take That Smarty Pants, Darna, and 2 copies of Life Web to potentially generate more, giving me a total of about 18 for expected Amber. For Amber Control, we have, again, Take That Smarty Pants situationally, Baruch the Marked, 2 copies of Life Web, and the Heart of a Forest for Key Control, with supporting cards like 2 copies of Vera Joya, giving me a total of Amber Control of just about 2, because we can't really count on that Take That Smarty Pants card. For Artifact Control, once again, there is none. For Creature Control, we have Coward's End, First Blood, Smite, 2 copies of Harder They Come, with supporting cards like 2 copies of Gauntlet of Command, Hallowed Shield, Shield of Justice, and 2 copies of Persistence Hunting, giving me a total of about 6 for Creature Control. For speed, we have 2 copies of Sound the Horns and 2 copies of Punctuated Equilibrium, giving me a total of about 5 for speed. And we have supporting cards like 2 copies of Grey Rider, Dusk Witch, and Disruption in Little Rapskull, and 2 copies of Punctuated Equilibrium. So overall, we have good Amber Generation, Creature Control, and Speed in this deck. The double Grey Rider is a nice highlight, as you guys are familiar with that potential combo. As for the bad, our Amber Control is definitely lacking, along with the Artifact Control. We only have 4 Brobnar creatures to go with those Sound the Horns, Smith, etc. So this deck would have benefited from having more Brobnar creatures. We also have very situational Amber Control that depends on logos being a part of the opponent's deck and that they have enough creatures on the board or cards on the board. And for Life Web that they play 3 or more creatures on any given turn, which is fairly easy to play around unless you have a huge hand that you really want to play down. So all in all, it's a situational deck with situational cards that lack the Amber Control to get the wins. And I'm going to rate this deck at a 51. Moving on to deck number 8, we have Catalanche, the Mistress Governor. It's a Brobnar, Logos, and Sanctum deck. For Amber Generation, we're starting with 9 pips. We have Foozle, Interdimensional Graft, Anahita the Trader with 5 potential artifacts to be used, and Martyr's End to generate more Amber, giving me a total of about 15 or more expected Amber depending on how many artifacts to kind of give away and how many creatures you destroy for Martyr's End. For Artifact Control, we have Screech Bomb, Interdimensional Graft, 2 copies of Obey the Grim, Gatekeeper, and Anahita the Trader, giving me a total of about 7 for Amber Control. Artifact Control is at a 0 once again. Creature control, we have 2 copies of Brammo, 2 Pound, a Flamethrower, Bellowing Patricate, and Standardized Testing, with supporting cards like Drummerknot to repeat those Brammos, Blinding Light, 2 copies of Hallowed Shield, Shield of Justice, Radiant Truth, and 3 copies of Bingo Bang Bang, giving me a total of about 8 for creature control. For speed, we have Igor, Helperbot, Hexbian, Library of Babel, 2 copies of Titan Librarian, Shark Goggle, and Memory Chip, giving me a total speed of about 8. So as for highlights, we have a decent average of everything in terms of stats for this deck, and we have good creature control and speed. Combo highlights, we have 2 copies of Brammo with Drummerknot. We have a lot of archiving for efficiency in our logo set, and we have Annihilated Trader with 5 burnable artifacts. Especially those Hallowed Shield with not many Sanctum creatures that we want to fight with. As for the bad, we don't have any artifact control. So all in all, it's a balanced toolkit deck with good combos, but it's missing a board wipe and artifact control. So I'll rate this deck at about a 68. Moving on to deck number 9, we have the Philanthropic. We have Philanthropic Tuxedo Fadil. It's a Logos, Mars, and Untamed deck. For Amber Generation, we're starting with 11 pips of Amber, with supporting cards like Eureka, Knowledge is Power, Darna, and Flaxia, giving me a total of about 16 or more, depending on how much Darna hits for and whether there's an archive for Knowledge is Power when it hits. For Amber Control, we once again have a deck that has 0 Amber Control. For Artifact Control, we have Destroy Them All, giving us a solid 1. For Creature Control, we have Destroy Them All, Mothership Support, Nature's Call, Curiosity, and Perilous Wilds, with supporting cards like 2 copies of Ancient Human, Shockworm, Red Planet Raygun, Stormcrawler, and Plague Master, giving me a total creature control of about a 5. As for speed, we have Helperbot, 2 copies of Titan Librarian, Wild Wormhole, 2 copies of Brain Eater, Eureka, Memory Chip, Research Smoko, Sloppy Lab Work, Knowledge is Power, the No Drone, and Punctuated Equilibrium, with supporting cards like the Proliferator. So overall speed is pretty high at about 14. So for highlights, we have really good speed with average Amber Generation and board control, but we're really lacking in, well, we have non-existent Amber control. So in summary, this is a race deck that's dependent on the board in order to have all the tools needed to get a win. So we're gonna have some struggles with decks that can easily wipe our board. And of course, having no Amber control is really detrimental. So all in all, I'm going to rate this deck at about a 55 on average, as this style of deck typically has a broad range of performance. When it hits, it hits. When it doesn't, it definitely will feel very sluggish. Moving on to deck number 10, we have Steel Maverick of the Stronghold. It's a Brightmoor, Logos, and Sanctum deck. For Amber Generation, we're looking at 15 pips to start, with supporting cards like Smith, Binary Rupture, Cutthroat Research, and Oath of Poverty, giving me a total expected Amber of about 20. For Amber Control, we have Cutthroat Research, Maruk the Marked, Take Hostages, Baron Mingevin, Doorstep to Heaven, so giving me a total of about 5. For Artifact Control, we have a value of 1 for the 2 copies of Remote Access. Creature Control, we have Coward's End, 2 copies of First Blood, Phoenix Heart, Standardized Testing, and Smite, with supporting cards like Gauntlet of Command, Into the Fray, Rock Hurling Giant, Blinding Light, and Radiant Truth, giving me a total of about 7 for Creature Control. As for speed, we have Lab Work, Titan Librarian, Wild Wormhole, Director of ZYX, and Field of the Researcher, with supporting cards like Archimedes and the Grey Rider. So overall speed, I'm going to rate it about a 5. For highlights, all the stats in this deck are good, but not amazing. However, we're lacking different types of artifact control, so it's only use rather than being able to remove them altogether. We have Binary Rupture without Interdimensional Graft, which personally I feel like is a liability, but again, like, depends on how you use it and situations arising, it could still be used. We have again a double First Blood, so you know how I feel about double alpha cards by now, and especially First Blood. And in this deck, there's only 4 Brightmoor creatures, so it's not going to be that great anyway. So all in all, this deck is a pseudo rush toolkit deck that's missing a way to remove an artifact. I'm going to rate this deck at about a 64. For deck number 11, we have Kaye, the Perpetually Sanitary. It's a Logos, Mars, and Untamed deck. For Amber Generation, we're looking at 15 pips of Amber to start once again, and supporting cards like Mars Needs Amber, Harvester, Darna, Lifeweb, and Soldiers to Flowers, giving me a total of about 20 for expected Amber. For Amber Control, we have Mars Needs Amber and Lifeweb, so that's just about a 2. For Artifact Control, we have 1 copy of Remote Access, giving me a 0.5. For Creature Control, we have Poke, 2 copies of Carpet Flotsam, Tixel Beambuckler, Mothership Support, and they're everywhere. Supporting cards include Mother Gun, Aging Human, Mindworm, and Shockworm, giving me total creature control about a 6. For speed, we have Helperbot, Hexbian, Poke, Sutterkin, Time Traveler, and No Drone. And supporting cards like Rocket Boots, Archimedes, and the 2 copies of Regrowth, giving me total speed of about 8. So for highlights, we have good Ember generation and speed. There's a lot of recursion, and we can potentially purge our own Untamed House, get rid of the fat in this deck. That's not really going to perform in the long run. And we also have a combination of They're Everywhere to do broad board-based damage, or Tixel being Buckler to do some damage, and Mothership support to support that Mars Needs Amber play. We have Scientifical Hack and Logos to help us use Mother Gun on a Logos or Untamed turn, though that would kind of give your next turn away given your hand being exposed to your opponent. As for the bad, we don't have enough Amber control when all of it is very situational once again, and we don't have enough artifact control. On top of that, we have board control being dependent on the board situation, because things like Carpet Flotsam require your own board to be gone in order for it to be utilized. So all in all, I'm going to rate this deck at about a 55. For the final deck in this display, we have Sir Blokfather Helswarn. It's a Mars, Sanctum, and Untamed deck. For Amber generation, we're looking at 12 pips of Amber, with supporting cards like Mars Needs Amber, 2 copies of Mindwarper, Full Moon, and Aphlaxia, giving me a total of about 18 for expected Amber. For Amber control, we have Mars Needs Amber, 2 copies of Mindwarper, 2 copies of Oddbait the Grim, 2 copies of Board and the Redeemed, and Take Hostages, giving me a total of about 8 for Amber control. Once again, there is no artifact control in this deck. For creature control, we have Carpet Flotsam, Mothership support, 2 copies of Flotsam Spike, and They're Everywhere. Supporting cards include Mindworm, Zookeeper, Plague Master, Radiant Truth, and Kindred Longshot. So overall creature control, I'm going to rate about a 5. For speed, we have only support cards with Think Drone, 3 copies of Grey Rider, Glimmer, Regrowth, Song of Spring, and Nepenthe Seed. So speed should be a 0, but I'm going to rate it about a 1. Overall, for highlights, we have decent Ember generation and control. We have a nice combo with They're Everywhere and Mars Needs Amber. But unfortunately, we don't have artifact control, and it's situational board control with low speed in this deck. The Mars board wipes are the worst in the game in this set, in my opinion, as they only work when your own board doesn't have creatures on it. We have a Plague Master that will hit the Sanctum creatures, so definitely anti-synergy there. And we would have needed some skirmish fighters to make full use of the Grey Rider's ability. Speaking of which, the most interesting part of this deck is that there's 3 copies of the Grey Rider. If we had a nice fighting house, this Grey Rider set would be very nice and supportive, and having them 3 in a row, I can imagine all the chaos that can create. All in all, not much to say about this deck. Just gonna rate it about a 54. That brings me to the end of this display. We did have a couple of interesting decks that looked pretty fun to play. Let me know what you guys thought. If your rating was something similar, if it was a bit different, let me know what you guys felt was your favorite deck. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys are ever curious about any decks that you see from my unboxings or interested in getting them to play for yourself, do feel free to let me know. I'll put in my decks of Keyforge link in the comment section below so you guys can take a look. Any feedback, comments, criticisms, suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And as always, be kind and happy forging.